you. Most of you already know this, but this will be my last SJR lecture, which is too bad. But I just wanted to take a moment just to say that I'm really thankful for this time. I've been thankful for the last couple of years, but especially this space, getting to hang out with some of you month after month here. So maybe I'll just open with a brief prayer for tonight, and then we'll get into it. Father, thanks for this group, in this place, in this night, and that you're here with us. Jesus, you've come that we would have life and have it abundantly. And so set us free by your truth, that we would live as those who are truly free, rooted in you, the Son who makes us free indeed. Yeah, we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So as all of you know, I've been studying at Regent the last couple of years, and it's also been an incredible gift to me, like St. John's Richmond. Just to give a little bit of personal context for it, I did my undergraduate degree in biblical studies over at Briarcrest out in Saskatchewan. So pretty beautiful to get a foundation like that. And then I spent some time pastoring out in Langley and a couple other places, and I found myself started to develop like some really, for me at the time, like really sort of troublesome theological and philosophical questions, like many people my age. And Regent's been a place where I've been able to work through some of those and get familiar with the Christian tradition, the classical tradition, in a way that I've become aware of that, these are not new things that people have wrestled with. And to be able to see like, a lot of people who are a lot smarter than me have wrestled with this many times throughout the centuries, actually. And that's been really grounding for me. I feel leaving Regent and leaving St. John's Richmond to this next kind of assignment, let's say, I feel quite grounded, which I'm really grateful for. I remember the first class that I took at Regent was with Bruce Hindmarsh. Some of you will know him, good Anglican. And in the opening of his lecture, he said this. He said, modernity, which is the moment that we live in, is marked by historical amnesia. Historical amnesia. Not Jesse, but the rest of modernity. And that line stuck with me. He said, it's not just true of our culture, it's also true of the church in general. And I felt at that moment, stepping in, that, this is true of me. Like, very unfamiliar with our past and our history. And I have no sense of arrival, just to be clear, I have no sense of arrival, but over the past 3 years, I think that's something that God's kind of given me at some level, to become a little more familiar with the theological tradition, the philosophical tradition, and that served kind of as the seedbed of Christianity. So Sean asked if I would be willing to share some of the things that I've been working through at Regent, and specifically a paper that I've been working on kind of as a capstone for one of my projects. And so I'll read portions of that tonight for you. Try not to bore you, but I'll read some portions of that as if this was almost like an academic kind of symposium or something like that. And so you can, you already know this, but you can raise a question, you can probe, you can disagree. I just wanted to make sure you always know you're invited to do that. So it touches on something that's in the air these days, across a whole bunch of different domains, but it's this idea that we're a society that's very confused about freedom. So let me just begin. The lecture tonight is titled, What is Freedom For? Escaping the Trap of Modern Freedom. Tonight I just want to ask this very simple question. It almost, but I think it often goes deeper than what we assume or what we can expect. What is freedom for? So we live in a culture that talks a lot about this idea, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. This is one of our foundational documents here in Canada. I'm from a country, as you know, just down south that boasts themselves as the land of the free. In my recent imaginary, I'm thinking of the Freedom Convoy making their way across Canada. We celebrate in the modern West, Europe, Australia, here, freedom of speech, freedom of choice, bodily autonomy, property rights, freedom from tyranny. This language, this idea, it's all around us. We're inundated with it in our politics, advertising. the freedom to self-identify, the freedom of religion, and all of it is related to this idea of human flourishing. And so just before we keep going, I want to, at risk of getting too complicated too fast, I want to give you 3 sort of heuristics, which is just like a tool. I'll kind of give you something on the board. These have been really helpful for me, and maybe will be good for you to kind of reference as you're listening to my paper tonight. You can kind of come back to. So one of the ancient problems philosophically that people have been talking about and wrestling through for millennia is the problem of the one and the many. So some of you may have heard that before. We could do it like a circle, let's say. This is not perfect, obviously, but yeah, so the one and the many. Or you could say another way is the whole and the parts. And so you could trace this across pretty much anywhere in the world. Let's just, for a couple simple analogies, let's start with a garden. There are many parts to a garden. There's the soil, there's billions of different individual organisms. There's the rain, the sun, the insects, all the different parts. And yet, one of the great mysteries is that there's a whole. You can't walk into a garden and not recognize that there's a unity. We could do it with our bodies. I have fingernails, I have eyelashes, I have organs, I have, to the very, hey, good to see you. The millions and millions of atoms, and yet there's this whole that is my body, right? We can do it politically, right? There's all the different parts of Canada, all the different individual people. And the question is, we've all wrestled with this at some level, but the question is, how do you maintain the whole while honoring all the parts? And politically, we tend to maybe go in 2 different directions. We tend to emphasize uniformity. Everyone is we're gonna put the whole first and foremost, or we get to something hyper individualistic. And you ask yourself, when we get to that point, you're like, what's gonna hold us all together? Okay, so you can do this at the Greeks, which I'll come to, but the Greeks would have said the whole cosmos was the language they used for the whole. And all the different parts fit within the one cosmos. And even these little parts you yourself are a little microcosmos, a microcosm. I've heard some of these languages. So this is kind of a heuristic I'm not gonna come back to it a lot, but it's a lot of what we're dealing with when we're dealing with the idea of freedom. How do you maintain that unity and yet allow for those individual differences, if you will? And this is free, as they say. In the Christian tradition, we have this image of God as the one who is triune, one, and yet there's distinction. And so what does it look like for there to be some sort of harmony? And the Christian tradition gives us something like the Trinity, right? Okay, another heuristic I'll give you. When we think, this is thinking about the nature of the reality, the world that we live in. Another heuristic you could say is, let's call it, in the Greek language, we'll say metaphysics. Has anybody ever heard of this? Yeah. And then physics. Let's just do this for fun. So this is kind of the material world, everything that you see. This table, my body, the water, the land, the stars, etc. Metaphysics is that invisible thing that is also profoundly real. In fact, it is no less real. And this is going to be really important for my paper as well. And this is where in modernity, the world that we live in now, this is kind of up for grabs. Is that real? So let me give you some examples of metaphysics. When you look at a sunset, almost universally, people have the ability to see beauty. When you experience genuine to and fro and back and forth and sacrificial love, you can't see love, but by golly, it's real, isn't it? Goodness. When you see someone sacrifice to go to work, make meals, provide for their child, you can recognize there is real goodness in the world. And so these invisible things that are profoundly real, that's a caricature a little bit, but that'll give you an idea of metaphysics. And so the question, maybe in the Hebrew tradition, we would say something like heaven and earth. right? Goodness, beauty, and truth. And the question becomes, what's the relationship between these two things? Is this make-believe? Is metaphysics, is it just imaginary? Is it a story that we tell ourselves and construct? Or is it something that's universal, that's deeply tied into the world that we live and move and breathe in? Or are they somehow even more intimate? Are they tied together somehow? Like so closely that you might even say incarnate? And it's difficult to find language to talk about that mystery. I'm just saying, so this is going to be in the paper a little bit about the relationship. I'm arguing in my paper that one of the reasons that we have that modern freedom becomes destructive, it diminishes our lives, is because we've lost sight of heaven. We've devalued what's invisible. We said that's not real. We've become so imminently focused that we've failed to see this part. Okay, that was a lot, I know. That's 2 heuristics. Last one I'll give you, which I'm at risk of losing you maybe, but when we talk about the language of harmony, shalom is the Hebrew language, flourishing, you've heard this before, I'm sure, this kind of idea of a fourfold relationship. That I don't want to isolate just one. So you could say we have a relationship with God, right? I don't know how we draw an arrow with that, but we'll say with God. And we'll say with others, let's say. And then with creation. And I'll even say with ourselves, your soul. This idea of kind of consciousness. Be someone that knows peace, that knows joy, that knows fortitude, integrity, character, etc. So for harmony, for flourishing, is there a way that we don't diminish any one of these relationships, but actually there's a way that they can be ordered, rightly ordered? It's a deeply Augustinian idea, but that they can, if our relationship with God and with creation and with others comes into a right ordering, that is genuine freedom. We'll come to that more. But okay, so those, I'm just going to leave those up there. Probably won't reference them a lot more, but I think you'll hear them in the background of my paper is what I'm saying. Let me read a quote for you, very short. This was in 1770s, so during the Enlightenment. This was an American revolutionary, and he says, "Give me liberty or give me death. Give me freedom or give me death." Very consequential, isn't it? If we were to try to define liberty in the average modern imagination, not everyone, but for many of us, we might say freedom is the ability to have an unhindered choice. To have an unhindered choice. In some ways, we might be able to sum up the whole modern experiment as an attempt to maximize one's individual freedom, the parts a little bit, if you will. The freedom of choice. So if tradition or religion or morality is sort of holding you back as an individual, those limits, then off with it, right? If it's an old power structure or a hierarchy or a king or a feudal lord or something like that, tip that hierarchy over, tip it over. Then you'll be free. Even nature itself. Maybe there's constraints that nature places upon you, on your body, on your life. That's okay, overcome it. You can detach from that. So you can be free from those constraints of nature. And the hope is, in all of this kind of move or this impulse, this move towards freedom from constraints, so that I could have my choice, the hope is that we would find happiness, right? Happiness. And the question I'm really probing in my paper is, has it worked? Has it worked? Is it working for us? I think many have observed this, but it's worth repeating, that we live in a time when we have more choices than ever. What to buy at the grocery store. I mean, think about the sheer amount of choices. Where we want to live, what we want to do with our lives, who who we'd like to be. We have more autonomy, we have more access to things, more opportunities for self-expression. We can do almost anything. I know that's a little overstated, but still. And despite all of this freedom, culture is marked by a profound anxiety. There's pervasive loneliness. And it's not all bad. I'm not here to say all this is bad, but there is a level of exhaustion from this seemingly unlimited freedom. And those aren't rare experiences. This is kind of everywhere. So G.K. Chesterton, he has this amazing quote from his book Heretics. Anybody read it before? Heretics? Maybe? No? Dabble? Okay, here it is.
Oh, Heretics, yes.
Yeah. So this is what he says. We are fond of talking about liberty, but the way we end up talking of it is an attempt to avoid discussing what is good. We're fond of talking about progress. That's a dodge to avoid discussing what is good. We're fond of talking about education. That is a dodge to avoid discussing what is good. The modern man says, leave all these arbitrary standards and embrace unadulterated liberty. This is logically rendered, let us not decide what is good, but let it be considered not to decide it. And he says, the modern man says, away with all your old moral standards, I'm for progress. And this logically stated means, let us not settle what is good, but let us settle whether we are getting more of it. And finally, the modern man says, neither in religion nor in morality, my friend, lies the hope of the race, but it is in education. And this clearly expressed means we cannot decide what is good, but let's give it to our children. So Chesterton touches on something essential, perhaps even more pronounced today than in his own, I don't know. But we've separated the notion of freedom from any notion of the good. So let me pause there just for a moment and open up for some discussion. And I'm going to start with a bit of an easy one. So this is not a test. We're not trying to get too deep right off the bat. But can you think of a time when you felt truly free? When you felt truly free, and what was it that made that moment feel that way? I'll start just to be nice. I have this very vivid memory of being 17 years old. My dad let me borrow his truck. It was summertime. We were driving through Oregon on our way to me and my best friend were on our way to California, and windows down on the road. You know what I mean? And the world was ours. No one to tell us what to do. You know, I felt really free, and it was awesome. It was great. So, anyways. What about you? Anything for you that you felt like a time when you felt truly free? And what was it that made you feel that way or something like that? Yeah.
This is nothing to do with what you just asked.
Yeah.
What I would say to what you just asked is I don't know that freedom's anything I particularly sought. I give it as a given, as free as I can be. I'm a woman, so never that free.
Yeah.
Men can be a threat. The world can be a threat. I'm aware I'm middle class, suburbanite, and I don't know what goes on in the big city, and bad things can happen without me being aware at all. So freedom's nothing I ever pursued.
Yeah.
Happiness maybe, goodness maybe, but not freedom. But I wanted to know who said that thing in 1770.
Nathan Hale.
Yeah. Oh, Nathan Hale, thank you, I missed that. Yeah. Thank you.
So I'm going to say that this happened recently, and it may not sound great,
Yeah.
but it was when I finally got divorced.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yes,
That's true.
that was freedom for not just
And I know that sounds horrible, but the reality was it was freedom from an absolutely overwhelming burden, and I was released from it.
Yeah.
Even though I carry some of the baggage still, it's a release and it's gone.
Yeah.
And I just feel a total relief from that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Jesse. That'll touch on a lot of what we're going to talk on tonight, so that's good. Yeah, it'll be in the background, I'm sure.
I'm just trying to think, I mean, it's sort of smaller things, like, I'm the oldest and my brothers are younger than me, so like there's always sort of jobs and expectations and, if parents sign you up to start working as soon as, when you're 15. But before that, there's that, it was the start of the summer holidays, like in school, before you were forced to work, and if you could get out the door, because when I was young, you could get out the door and be gone all day, playing with your friends, and that was fine, right? And so you just got out before they lined you up to paint something. And so that was freedom.
That's a good one. That's a great memory.
I think one of my first senses of freedom is I grew up in Northern Ontario and we were fortunate to live on this huge lake. And when I was first able to go out in the boats with a boat, we had a sailboat and we had a small motorboat. When I was able to go out on my own on the lake and to just be on my own out there because I loved it, escape my family, my sisters, all that stuff. So that's one thing.
Yeah, that's good. It's a good one.
And
I
I
remember,
want to hike.
And something about escaping the noise?
Oh, the noise, the car, the
Right.
schedule,
Yeah.
everything.
I remember, my father died when I was quite young. So my mother had to work during the summer. So she shipped us off with my grandparents to this cottage in Wasaga Beach in Ontario. And my grandparents had no idea what to do with us. Like their only responsibility was feeding us basically, right? The rest of the time we were free to just, like we would rent these, my sister and I would rent these bicycle built for twos and go up and down the beach and we would just spend all the time, in the waves at Wasaga Beach. And they had an amusement center and you could play these games, and it was just like a total amusement thing. Like it's just, anything you could imagine was at Wasaga Beach.
Yeah.
So that was great.
That's good. Yeah. This may be, there's probably more things that draw some of these things. One of the things I'm hearing is like not having to carry the burden of responsibility a little bit. Something sort of leisurely and playful. There's definitely some common there. I don't want to cut anybody else off. Anyone else? Okay, one more. I'm thinking here, particularly when I ask this question, I'm thinking of the tension between the tension between commitment, responsibility to someone or to something, and that pull against, that tension and sort of freedom. Let's say that's what I'm thinking of when I ask this.
So Matt, who do you think's in terms of defining what your freedom's going to be? Who is it that defines freedom? Like the government defines it through the Charter of rights and freedoms, but to some extent we create our own individual freedom, right?
Yeah.
Is that part of
I'm definitely going to try to get into that tension. Yeah, a little bit. I hope that you hear that. Let's come back. Can we come back to that a little bit? But that is the tension I want to try to talk about with some nuance. Yeah.
Okay.
But maybe, in that tension, do you think it's possible to have too much freedom? Or maybe more specifically, can you think of some concrete examples today where you think, not to point the finger at everyone else, but like where maybe people have too much freedom, too many rights, you might say. And ironically, it's causing some sort of diminishment to either themselves or the social structures, if you
If
will.
we say freedom is unhindered choice, I think that leaves us in a kind of spiritual paralysis. Because there are no parameters and no gauges. How do, you said what is the good of all the choices?
Well, certainly there's always this slippery slope over the issue of freedom of speech.
Okay.
Because the reality is okay, there's certain limits to freedom of speech.
Yes.
And we need to be very careful about that. Because quite frankly, the attitude that many people north or south of the border have on this idea of freedom of speech is wrong. They're not, you can't say anything. You need to be conscious of what your impact is on who you were talking to. You need to be aware of that. You cannot just say, well, I don't like Jews. But, or I hate these people because they eat cats. Well, this is nonsense. And it's hurtful, harmful, and it's detrimental to society.
Yeah, so totally very live issue of how far what's the relationship between freedom and rights.
Who's the arbiter of what's acceptable to say?
Exactly.
It's terrible that you eat fish, or it's terrible that you eat cats. Well, we've made a decision, one we don't eat, one we do eat.
Right.
So
I think it's terrible, we just take fish out of the ocean and we don't put any more back in.
This is something that you're gonna miss when you move to the States.
Yeah.
Canadians are really fond of talking about their founding documents as being about peace, order, and good government.
Yes.
Versus life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah.
In south of the border.
Yeah.
And I think those bear different fruit.
Yes.
And I think the Canadian fear is that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness leads ultimately to anarchy.
Yeah.
And if you don't have strong social structures to keep all that in check, the human animal, to say it not in really the right way, but the human sinner, is liable to anarchy and idolatry and perversity and all the rest of it.
And then it's my happiness matters more than yours,
Well,
or
then it
yours,
becomes-
or yours,
Yeah.
or yours.
Yeah, but and then the
Yeah.
founding fathers in the States had huge difficulties with this very specific issue.
Yeah.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is an incredibly vague thing. What the frick does that mean?
Sarah knows.
So,
Sarah
told me.
knows. Sarah knows.
Well, who did I read? Some famous person, I can't remember, but, we have construed happiness to be an individual property, but the founding fathers may have meant social happiness, to be engaged in building the welfare of your community. That is happiness, that is civic happiness.
right, but Hamilton was very concerned about trying to control the masses, because he was deathly afraid of what the masses were going to do.
Yeah.
That's why they developed the whatever it is, the electoral college.
Yeah.
Which and it's a crazy way of dealing with this whole issue. Like it was this sort of 18th century notion that we have to control the mob.
Yeah.
So and we've got life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is ridiculously anarchic.
Yeah.
So how are we going to control
So-
this?
I want to come back to the individual though, and it's just, I think that at some level, although it doesn't sound appealing to begin with, if this idea of unhindered choice, it leaves us as children. There's no maturing, and I think that is a lack of flourishing if we don't mature by accepting responsibility, right?
Yeah.
Well, in some senses, it's you're hoping that people will be mature enough to know I've overstepped the bounds of decorum, and unfortunately that isn't happening.
Yeah.
It reminds me a little bit of the Ten Commandments, where the Ten Commandments are mostly stated in the negative and they're prohibitive. So you shall not do this one thing. And what the Ten Commandments don't do is they don't say what's possible, right? They say they identify one thing that you should not do for your welfare, for flourishing, for liberty. Do not do this. But then it's left. There's a broader context in the Torah that tells you, by implication and explicitly, how to live in a positive sense. And so, and that's your comment, Jesse, resonates, because today we don't have that umbrella anymore, that sort of sacred umbrella of understanding of God and other and service and love and respect. So we don't have that, and so then it does devolve to what you just said, Mary, this kind of rampant individualistic, well, my rights are more important than anybody else's rights, thank you very much, I don't care about them, right? And so then of course, then it comes right, then you're down to prohibitive law is the only thing that can work to control the masses, is you have 15 laws about how to, wherever you go, there's a list this long of things that you must not do.
Yeah.
But that's not liberty, that's childishness, that's,
Yeah.
you have to be told by your parents what to do and what not to do. But that's not the way God designed us. He designed us to be ethicists and to be thinkers and to be lovers and to be thinking of others, right? So it's a...
I feel like this is a little oversimplification, but I feel like we talked a little bit about, we talked a little bit at a political level, so many of you know this, but political being the etymology of that word, the right ordering of a society. So we talked a little bit about that, like how can you structure a society that at least makes the best opportunity for flourishing for the individuals and the whole, right? We talked about that. Then we can also, which some of us touched on very briefly, especially Gail, at the level of like one's individual. So in Canada, even though I do agree that the Charter of Rights and Freedom is a little more parliamentary, it's more communitarian, I'm really thankful for that. We still have a profound amount of individual autonomy, and individuals have, there's a lot of self-destruction happening in individuals in Canada because of the choices that I make, but also anyone can make, right? And so I'm trying to think in terms of that realm. I want to talk about both, but I'm glad we have both of those in mind. But in terms of that realm, those concrete sort of things that we can do that actually diminish our own lives, that sense of that's my right, that's my freedom. Because I want to be cognizant of time, we're going to keep going, but hold those two in your mind a little bit, right? At a social level, at an individual level, inevitably you can't separate them, but okay. I'm going to read a little bit of my paper, okay? So hopefully I don't lose you. Here we go. In the modern world, freedom has become one of our most cherished values, and yet it remains one of the more complex and widely misunderstood aspects of being human. We regularly speak of freedom as the power to choose, or the right to autonomy. In our modern imaginary, freedom is predominantly understood as freedom from constraint, from obligation, from external authorities. Modern liberalism champions this vision and seeks maximum liberty to make one's own choices, to determine one's own identity, to acquire property, to pursue one's own happiness, to have one's own political voice, and so forth. And within this framework, freedom has become synonymous with self-determination, at least partially severing individuals from any pre-existing ties, from contexts, relationships, or metaphysical realities, beauty, goodness, truth, that might give better shape, or as Sarah said, context or direction to one's life. But if we pause, if we listen to the silence of our inner lives, to the fragile threads of our connections with others, something in this definition of freedom, it rings hollow. In our pursuit of unrestricted autonomy, we risk losing sight of freedom's deeper meaning, its deeper purpose, the philosophical word ontology. Inevitably, the modern vision of freedom fosters a competitive dynamic. It's intrinsically competitive. Not just between individuals, as each person or each group seeks to assert their will, but I'm going to make an even a further case that it actually puts us in conflict with reality itself. With all of reality, that which is visible and invisible. This conception of freedom puts us in conflict with that. And so this paper that I've written explores freedom as something that's richer than just independence. It seeks to recover and the primary philosopher that I worked with was a man named D.C. Schindler. I can tell you more about him, but D.C. Schindler, what he describes as symbolical freedom. Symbolical freedom, we'll come back to that. It is a freedom that is not just about mere choice or self-determination, but the key word for tonight, participation. participation in the good. This is the kind of freedom that is not tyrannical, it doesn't enslave, it's not oppressive, but instead it opens you up. It opens you up to a reality that creates space for a more fruitful and fulfilling life. It's a freedom that is full of potential and a kind of becoming that prioritizes and is rooted in what is universal, but it's unique to each one of you in your particularity, which is to say, it doesn't just try to make everyone the same. It creates space for different expressions. So let's pause there for a moment. And I want to just try to, I don't want to, have you heard of the language of straw man? To straw man something, to maybe to say that modern freedom, to kind of say like, oh, look how pathetic that is. I don't want to do that. I want to give it the best. I want to make it as strong as possible. Like, why was it a good thing? Why was there this move from the medieval ages through the Reformation, the Enlightenment, into the modern period now? Like, there was a reason that we made this move, and it was a good reason, is what I'm trying to say. And I want to make that case for a second. So I'll just do 5 shifts. These are not perfect. I'm doing a bit of a caricature, but just to wrap our heads around them. So Middle Ages are known, like, one from hierarchy, right? We'll say from hierarchy. So your role, your identity in the Middle Ages, it's largely determined by what? Your birth. You were a serf, you were a knight or a noble, and your life was tied to whatever that rigid social structure was. There's no kind of movement, let's say, very little, if any. And so the modern idea of liberty promises freedom from those constraints, right? Being locked into that life, that feudal sort of obligation to whoever, whether you hit the jackpot or worst case scenario, you got a terrible feudal lord, right? Second one, it was like, let's say, a recovery of some form of individualism. So you were saved, let's say, from a kind of collectivism.
Is that still the Middle Ages?
Yeah, this move out of the Middle Ages into we'll reference the Reformation and kind of the Enlightenment here in just a second, but people belong to parishes, to villages, to guilds, to churches, right? And the modern world starts to see the individual as someone who has rights and a priority outside of those things. It's just taken as a given. And so it shifts a bit of that power, right, from whatever that system, that collective group was, to a bit of the individual, right? Your worth is not just in your role within society, it's actually in you as a person, your reason, your conscience. These are not completely new ideas, but there's definitely a shift that's happening during this period. The third one is a freedom of conscience, right? From conscience. So the Reformation, you know this, it shatters sort of the unity of the Catholic Church, right? Pope and the teaching of the church and the tradition. Suddenly this idea emerges that we can read scripture for ourselves. We can interpret this. We can kind of break away from this institutional juggernaut that is so oppressive. And so, yeah, you can follow your own conscience, right? It doesn't have to be stuck in this hierarchy. So great move. And then I could keep going. The escape from sort of monarchical control, the relationship between the church and the state. There's just so much power tied up centrally, right? And again, there's this move away from that. If you have a really arbitrary pope, a very arbitrary king who at his own whim wants to do what he wants, this move towards rights and freedoms and autonomy is a great move for the individual, right? And then the last one I think is capital, so economic. This idea of you being sort of a feudal system where you're paying dues and you're just stuck as a serf in this system. There's no movement. All of a sudden now you can have some rights, and over time you can make a new life for your family. And so, you hear what I'm saying? There's reason that this was a good move is what I'm trying to say.
Sure.
I don't want to just scapegoat it, if you will.
It's very interesting. sorry, I'm sorry for, it's very interesting, this is very much a sort of a Western concept.
Okay,
Because it's certainly not the concept of India.
Yes.
Because India is designed, it's still a hierarchical society.
Yeah.
The caste system is extremely
Yeah.
hierarchical.
Yeah.
And continues as such.
And much of Asia is still collective.
But you
and
know-
one of the, sorry,
Sorry, I was just gonna say, it worked, like the serfs were protected by the Lord. They were given land to work, it wasn't their land.
Yeah.
But they had an income, they didn't starve, they were, there were the knights to do the fighting. Like, it was a system that was enclosed and worked.
They weren't perfect.
It didn't work.
and I think that's really important to say, is that you can have different forms of government, right? Like, hear me out, you can disagree with this strongly if you want, but if you have a very good king
Yeah.
who is just, you can have an amazing society where he's serving, right? And that moves it all the way down the hierarchy. You might say that's far preferable to have a good king. Now, you get a bad one, good luck. So I'm just saying, we get to this point somehow in history where, and I'm not trying to make this argument, I'm just posing it as a question. Does it get to the point where it becomes so concretized, so corrupt, that there's like sort of a movement away, right?
We're seeing a movement away right down south of the border, right at the moment.
And I think it's a live question, and people can hate this question, because I don't pretend to know the answer. But in the same way that became corrupt, is this level of everyone has their rights and freedom, is it becoming so corrupt that the center can't hold anymore? What is it that unites us? I'm not saying that's good or bad or in between. I'm just saying these are the questions that people are wrestling with. And it comes back to our question of freedom. Let me open it up for another question here. Is there a way that you can feel the impulse, right? I've always found this helpful. I don't know if you like this, but I'm gonna get this wrong. Here we go. So, like centripetal force is when things get like a
Spun out to the edge.
yeah. And then centrifugal is when things start to scatter and break apart, right?
No, that's,
Or am I doing it the opposite?
I think it's coming in, one is coming in and one is
Yes.
spinning out.
Yeah, I'm getting them wrong, but yeah, centrifugal and centripetal.
Yeah.
So there's this, let's just for the sake of the conversation, there's this way that it, more and more power gets in the hands of one person, let's say, of the whole, whoever's in charge of the collective. And then there's this sort of democratizing force that goes this way. And now, you don't have to agree with my hypothesis, but have we gotten so far where, what is the center that's gonna hold us, if you will? And so I guess this is a leading question, but that's my hunch. And I don't know, do you think there's parts of these that we've reacted against them too strongly?
Can you be more specific?
That's a great question.
You're still talking about political freedom, aren't you?
I am talking about political freedom at this moment, yes.
And we're really talking about the US, aren't we?
No.
No, anybody.
Canadian?
Anyway, yeah.
And it's like the culture and the country to some extent.
Yeah,
How much freedom you have.
yeah.
I mean,
Are we
you
worried
never
about
get
the
this
center
thinking.
holding? Is Britain worried about the center holding? Like,
And I'll just say one word, and you hear this today, is authoritarianism. So that's
Yeah.
one way of the center holding.
Yes.
Is to have,
Yeah.
despotic
That's right.
authoritarianism. So
Right.
there's
But
the
that's-
answer.
Yeah.
Sean,
We don't want, that's not preferable.
authoritarianism never worked.
Yeah.
Because what happens in any, perfect example, feudal China. Because basically what happens in there is they all have this idea, we have a strong central government. Bullshit. We don't have a strong central government. What we have is you have warlords or governors everywhere doing their own thing and taking their own money and doing whatever they want. And then, oh well, just pay some lip service to him and I can get on and do what I like.
what friction?
And we're seeing this in all sorts of different countries now.
But modern China is not.
Arguably, Western
I mean,
liberal
yeah.
democracy is spinning ever more wildly as we see rises of authoritarianism in a number of countries. I mean, the extreme right was not on the ticket when I was a child.
No, it wasn't 30 years ago.
No,
No,
It's a really recent
thing.
phenomenon.
Yeah.
So is that, I'm trying to actually have a picture of the center not holding. And is that a sense of agreement on what freedom is? Or like, what is the picture of or is it just society breaking down the center not
It's
holding?
a central government that works.
Yeah, I guess that's.
Yeah, and then maybe, and that's one of the problems I'm getting into, just even in facilitating this discussion, because there's a sense in which we can talk about it politically, at a state level. There's a way we can talk about it at a familial level,
Right.
because families are, again, a bit of a caricature, but more splintering. Very few families live next to each other. Very few families will go. I know this is not, maybe it's not true of many of your families, but it strikes me that many people in my generation are quick to go, see ya. And I don't really have any responsibility. They're just, blood doesn't mean anything anymore.
Right.
Again, I'm overstating it, but I don't think that that's uncommon. So at the familial level.
So it's,
Yeah.
so it's just a sense of, if we talk about it, so everybody's becoming their own individual.
Yeah.
And there's nothing to sort of
Yeah.
make a whole out of the parts anymore. Is that what the center not holding is? Yeah.
Together.
Yeah.
I think
And
that's,
you can trace, the problem is that you can trace this all over the place, and then you start to see it everywhere, and is that necessarily true either? But I hesitate to give examples because I don't want to isolate anyone or
Here's a kind of weird example.
Yeah.
Remember COVID, everybody, didn't have to go to the office anymore, so they worked remotely.
yes,
And now there's just so many people, they're even arguing, I have the right to work at home now.
Yeah.
I'm not coming to the office.
yeah,
Right?
that's another good example.
but you could argue, I think, that one of the sources of political tension
Mm-hmm.
is people feeling the tension of the centrifugal force. That for many, many communities, these things are still very important.
Yes,
To know my role in society,
That's
to
right,
be
right.
loyal to a group,
yeah,
to be responsible for something.
Yeah.
These are deeply valued in
Yeah.
many places. And when we look at the popular media, we look at the global elites,
Mhm.
we don't see these things. And so there's a sense of humanity going to the wrong place.
Well, the other also interesting thing, and this is me being the historian and being a bit of a nerd, but the reality is we see this is a constant evolution in society.
Yeah.
Is we work in a center, we have a center, and then after a while, I don't like that anymore, or I'm going to revolt from this,
Yeah.
or I'm going to go away. I don't want this, and it wasn't just in the Renaissance when this occurred.
Mhm.
I mean, you've seen this a number of times in Chinese dynasties where, and the way they explained it all as well.
Mhm.
The emperor lost the mandate of heaven, so that was okay.
Right.
It was okay, and we could do whatever we wanted, and then we got back to, we had chaos.
Yeah.
And then it was brought back in, and then we had chaos again, and it went back and forth.
Yeah.
So, and certainly, even the Roman Empire, it was it was a very familiar thing happening in the empire, the empire as well. So, but I mean, I do get the gist of the conversation, but this is a sort of in some senses, it's almost a natural process of the way we live.
Right. So is there an inevitability to it, is what you're
Yes.
wondering? Let me say this. So we've been talking maybe a lot politically with others. I wonder if we talk with creation when we conceive of freedom. I don't have any responsibility to the creation. Therefore, I can take it, use it, and do whatever I want with it.
Yeah.
If we think about it in relationship to God, obviously it's more complex than this. Hear me out. I'm not trying to say it's just our morals, but I don't need to follow whatever God's way is for holiness. I'm going to do whatever feels good. So I'm just saying, in all of these domains, there's a way in which we can become severed from a kind of freedom that participates in God. Yeah.
God. So I just want you to
Yeah.
direct us a little bit more
Yeah.
and bring us back to what you're suggesting in your paper. Like,
Yeah, let me keep-
where do you want, because I mean, we can talk all night about centrifugal and centrifugal.
Yeah.
Because there's lots of examples, and
Yes.
it's very pregnant for all of us.
It's pregnant, yeah.
But you're writing a paper.
Yeah, so let me keep going here, is that okay?
Yeah, yeah.
So I want to present, Schindler uses this two visions of freedom. Two visions of freedom is what he lays out. One is symbolical, and the other is diabolical. Which is slightly haunting. So he explores these two visions of freedom, and I'm reading my paper here just so you know. He introduces this language that's startling and insightful. Symbolical freedom, he suggests, is rooted in relationship. There's an openness to the classical transcendentals, what is good, what is beautiful, what is true, that brings yourself, your very self, into alignment with what is real. Think real as in all of these things, right? In symbolical freedom, there's harmony between the self and the world. There's a mutual giving and receiving that enriches both. This Greek word symbolo, it means to join together. So Schindler, he draws on a philosopher named Paul Ricoeur, this concept of the symbolical, and he articulates this idea of a cosmos, the pre-modern cosmos. So to be joined together with the whole cosmos. It is a freedom not of standing apart, but of coming together, not of isolation, but of belonging. And so the self finds its fulfillment not in constructing one's own reality and breaking free from the one that we've been given, but rather in returning to what's been given, being reconciled to it, and becoming part of a larger and harmonious whole. And so to understand freedom in this way, we have to move beyond, one of the big thinkers in the Enlightenment is John Locke, and this kind of Lockean idea of freedom as an individual's power to over your own will, to make your own choice, if you will. And we need to move toward a vision that sees freedom as a relationship. And if you want to put something in quotes, freedom as a capacity for a bond, the capacity to have a bond, which in the Hebrew might be the capacity for a covenant. A lived and active, dynamic connection with beauty, with goodness, with truth, with God. Diabolical freedom, by contrast, is a freedom of severance. This word diabolical, it means to divide, to set apart, or at odds, to fragment. Diabolical freedom defines itself as against any bond, against any limit, prizing independence above everything else. It's a freedom that resists being defined, as Sarah said earlier, by any context, resists being defined by anything outside of the self. And ironically, or you could say paradoxically, then it leads to a kind of confinement, or an enslavement is the biblical language. In pursuit of our autonomy, it cuts us off from the very reality that would potentially give it depth and meaning. It's a freedom of disconnection, one that prizes self-sufficiency to such an extent that it loses touch with the world beyond itself, and therefore becomes diminishing and self-destructive. So the implications of these two visions are profound. To repeat, symbolical freedom invites the self into a dynamic relationship with the transcendentals, with heaven, with the hidden things of God. And it offers a freedom that is generative, it's expansive, and it's deeply enriching. And it is a freedom that opens the self to participation in a larger and harmonious whole. And you get to bring out in your life new and creative expressions of beauty, unique expressions in each one of us of beauty, of goodness, of truth, through connection with what is real. And so I'm going to come to this example just to give you something really concrete, like an analogy later. But if you think of a pianist, years and years of practice, they reach a point where they have finally this sort of technical mastery, right? They know the notes, but they've transformed all of that technical stuff that they've been working on for all those years. They don't just know the chords, but they begin to inhabit the music, right? They improvise. They bring all of those little parts together, and it's able to speak beyond just the technique or the notes of playing a piano. Or you can think of a symphony, one part of that symphony. They don't get to just break free and do whatever they want. They learn to become a part of this great symphony, to create something. This is symbolical freedom in its richest sense. It's this ability to dwell within what is given and yet manifest something really beautiful. It's to participate in this beauty and this goodness and yet not be constrained by it, but actually to become even more fruitful. So diabolical freedom, by contrast, it elevates autonomy to the highest point, and it leaves us isolated and unfulfilled. And so you can imagine anyone, like I said before, who wants to truly break free. I'm thinking of my daughters who are still learning to play piano, but they just, pound that piano, right? They're so free. No one is holding them back. There is no constraint to these girls, and it is just a gong, right? And what I'm trying to say is that tension of participating in that, it goes to the very heart of what it means to be a human. To be free is to participate in a world that we've been given, and the bodies that we've been given, and the life that we've been given, and to recover that connection to heaven, to the metaphysical vision of goodness. One that sees the whole world as relational, as participatory. It's not mechanistic, it's not reductive. It sees it united, and to see yourself as a part of that larger whole. I feel like I want to come up for a breather for a second. Is that okay?
Sure.
For me, at least. I know we might not like this. Can we take a 2-minute break? Is that okay? Or a 3-minute break?
Yeah.
Okay. Feel free to grab something if you need. Maybe it's just me.
So you're doing the hard work.
You're doing the hard work, yeah, absolutely.
Friday, did you steer or is it?
Did you bite
Yeah,
it?
but I am tuning out at a time. It goes right.
It does go.
I did
Yeah,
it
it's
last week,
very
first time, and
Eat the fish, Susan.
What was that?
Eat the fish,
Oh,
Susan.
yeah, that's
If you
it.
want.
No, Barry and I, we're not fish people.
Oh, you're not fish
Only
people?
fish and chips.
Oh, you and Doug, you with Doug? too?
Yeah, that's it. That's it, fish and chips and anything with lots of mayonnaise on it. Say tuna salad.
Yeah,
That's
that's good,
right.
that's good, yeah.
No, I wasn't sure, like I said, I grew up in Toronto, but I wasn't sure they let me stay in BC, so I didn't like
Oh,
seeing it.
yeah, those are fighting birds.
Yeah.
Yes, I should pause that
How about who?
Let's pause.
John Locke, the enlightenment.
Yes.
Work on the symbolic freedom, the group, remember, and relationships over here.
Can I just say,
Yeah.
Pat, that what you just said there, comparing the symbolical and the diabolical is very, very helpful.
Yes.
I
Like
just,
that really helps.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I love
It was that
it.
kind of what you were loving, something like that.
Yeah.
thank you.
So what is diabolical then, in contrast? Is it the opposite, pulling away from, not belonging, but pulling,
Exactly, yeah.
which is where you think we're headed in the modern?
Well, I don't want to get into this too much because I'm not smart enough to say it, but yeah, I think that that's definitely one side of the problem for sure. Is there's sort of rupture that's happening between. There's multiple things that are happening. My thesis in my paper is that one of the things that's happened is we've disregarded anything that's invisible. We say that we have a few things that we say. We say something like, that's just a construct. And so you can have your own construct, you can have your own construct, you can have your own construct, and just let everyone be alone. Let's all agree to let each other be completely autonomous, right? That's one. Another one might say something like, well, there's none of that invisible stuff. It's just, those are biological things going off in your brain. And so we can fix that by, medicine or however we're gonna do, you just cut yourself off from anything that could give your life context and meaning and purpose. And I think that is what is diabolical, is what I'm trying to say. And the repercussions and the consequences of that are enormous. Yeah, for one's body, for one's relationships, for one's soul, for the cosmos. Creation is groaning, I think, for multiple reasons, but at least, this is part of why it's groaning right now. So anyways, that would be a quick shake at it. Yeah.
Sort of, I'm thinking of C.S. Lewis's Palantir and the Weston, and he becomes a non-human. It's a walk towards becoming unhuman.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. And that's what he's doing in those books, is he is trying to, I have not spent enough time with those, but he is trying to wed these things back together in a way that people can grasp.
With your imagination,
Yeah.
it resonates, and without having the other words that might make you back away.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, and that's the best way to do it, is through fiction, right? Like, you're masterful if you can do it through fiction.
Yeah.
You can do it through propositions and stuff. It's like, okay, you're trying, good job. If you can write fiction and do it, then you're masterful.
One of the things about the diabolical that we see in our culture is, this move that the way we understand ourselves has no limits. So if I self-identify as a woman, there is no reason why I should not pursue that. And not only that, I should affirm myself in that, but not only that, every one of you should affirm me, and in fact must affirm me. And to not affirm me is abuse. And that's the culture that we're living in now, that's so radically, diabolically free that
This is exactly, this is the perfect segue to where I'm gonna go.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Okay, so Schindler, who I worked with in this paper, he uses to describe what you heard me talk about how he thinks we've just disregarded this in multiple ways. But he says the irony is that we actually have one, it's just we're not aware of it. It's kind of an unconscious, and the title that he gives to the modern, he uses the language of bourgeois metaphysics. See if I can spell that, bourgeois.
French.
Sarah knows how to spell it.
Yeah, you did.
It's a hard word to spell.
I'm gonna get this wrong.
Oh,
Thank you. Bourgeois metaphysics. Yeah, I'm not even saying it right. Is it bourgeois? Am I bourgeois? Thank you.
Madame Bovary.
So, let me keep going here a little bit. So bourgeois for Schindler describes more than just a social class. It characterizes a whole mode of existence, a way of being, a pattern of life that is ultimately founded upon self-interest. So to speak of bourgeois metaphysics is to acknowledge that this outlook expresses a whole underlying vision of reality, of the world that we live in. And it's a perspective that absolutizes individuals, which is what Sean was getting at. Things are self-contained entities, just little parts, just lead me to my part. And they do not belong in some essential sense to something greater, some larger whole. And each particular thing is seen as independent and self-sufficient, which is an illusion, with no intrinsic orientation to something greater or whole. And so consequently, rather than pointing beyond themselves, they are regarded merely as just isolated parts, and they're closed off from that overarching unity and purpose.
Ayn Rand.
Yes. So this outlook profoundly influences many of our social norms, and particularly how we conceive and prioritize toleration today. This is one of our favorite words, toleration, tolerate. Toleration becomes essential even, you have to have it, not as a virtue that's rooted in sort of a virtue that you own as mutual respect, like I have mutual respect for you, But rather toleration is an agreement that we all make, all the parts make with one another to stay out of each other's way. Schindler says that to live and let live and just let that person live, is a commitment to let us all agree to be self-centered individuals. And in this view, we give each other the space so that each one may do and be whatever he or she they like, and only crossing paths in order to affirm one another's autonomy. Affirm their autonomy, instead of fostering a genuine connection, instead of a real communion, which I think is an important word for us as Christians, communion. So in this bourgeois metaphysics, in this conception of the world, love then is reduced to an act of just preserving one's separateness, rather than that capacity for a bond, for a covenant, rather than cultivating a greater unity. So this diminished view of love is captured well by the poet, Rainier Maria Rilke. He says, "Love becomes the mutual guarding, bordering, and saluting of two solitudes." And this self-centered vision of freedom, which prioritizes autonomy and self-interest, is diabolical in that it subtly erodes our connection not just to one another, but to all of reality, to the world that we've been given, the cosmos. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. And I'll try to pick up here. So this distorted vision of freedom that's severed from what is good and beautiful and true, what it does is it inevitably just starts to turn inward. And it leaves our wills, which is to say our desires, our will, it leaves us vulnerable to the tyranny of our own appetites, our own desires, our own passions. You've heard this in the Christian tradition. I could go through a number of those things, but you're probably pretty familiar with them. Food, sex, technology, money, all of these things, this is all deeply Augustinian. These are really good things, but when they become ultimate things, they end up getting everything out of order, right? Success, rest, leisure, all of it. It's all good, but somehow it can actually become something that eats us alive, it corrupts us, and so much so that we actually can get to the point where it takes on a form of captivity. What was meant for freedom, what was meant for it to be symbolical and ordered, ends up actually, we're at the mercy of whatever these wants and these desires of the physics, the earthly part, because we've forgotten or we're unable to see God, the one who is hidden but with us. And so theologically this has really profound implications. If human freedom is to participate, if that's what we're after, is participation in what is good and beautiful, then enslavement represents a rejection of that invitation from God. God's will, his will for our lives, and this touches a little bit on that relationship between God's sovereignty, right, and our freedom, and that age-old debate about these two things, which one makes that priority. If God's will then ultimately becomes not about domination or control, but his will is always about drawing us into a life that reflects and participates in his own goodness, in his own beauty, in his own truth. And so when the will turns inward, it distorts itself and it retreats from the real true freedom that's offered us that is in alignment with God, in alignment with the transcendentals. So let me finish with this conclusion. So in conclusion, what Schindler seeks to recover is a symbolical vision of reality, one that calls us beyond ourselves. We actually have to open up, right? As one of the parts, we have to be open to a bond, into a meaningful engagement with what is real. And in some ways, you have to be open to God, to others, to yourself, and to the creation. So there's this opening, this participation. And for Schindler, this good, it is actually an active presence. God is a presence in your life. Beauty is a presence in your life. And it actually makes a profound claim upon you. The world makes claims upon you, and you get to decide whether you become someone who is open or closed. And so rather than retreating into an interior world of private feelings and personal preference, Schindler urges this renewed connection to what is real and to the responsibilities that that then brings, the claims that the beauty, goodness, and truth make on your life. As the German romantic Novalis eloquently observed, he said, and this gets really complex, so I don't want to lose anyone, but the soul, which is each one of you have a soul. This is actually pretty out of vogue right now, which this is an aside, sorry, but I feel like I need to say this. I kind of wrote off the soul, probably like, I was like, what does that even mean? Is that like this thing inside you that goes off to heaven somewhere? I don't know, like, is it a spirit or something? But I've come now to like embrace that language and hold it as dear. The soul, each one of you has a soul. And it's to say that each one of you has only your experiences. You're the ones who've grown up in your family. You're the one who your life has responded to those experiences in your life. Which is to say, you're the one you have your memories. You have the reason that has been formed in you. Right? You have your own desires that are different than my desires, and there is irreducible particularity. Irreducible, you are completely unique, your soul is. And God has been forming that. And what Novalis says is that it is that soul in you, that hidden thing. It's invisible, that hidden thing, but it's real. It might be the most real thing you have. That is where the inner and the outer world touch. That's where God meets you. In prayer, in contemplation, in worship. That is the place where God takes his beauty, his goodness, his truth, confronts you in the story of Jesus, in his real presence, right? And you have a genuine engagement with a greater reality, with heaven, with God's Spirit. It begins with time to grant a sort of symbolical freedom, right? A transformation of one's soul, a participation in what is good. And that starts to give your life a greater context and coherence and depth and richness that individualism alone cannot provide us. And so the last paragraph, to speak of symbolical freedom is to understand freedom not as escape or isolation, but an invitation into wholeness with God, with all of creation. Again, I come back to the image of the musician who through years of disciplined practice reaches this point where the technical mastery begins to transform into something even greater. And the pianist begins to inhabit the music. They improvise, they have the ability, they're transformed, they begin to bring it alive in a way that it speaks even beyond all of the specific parts. There's a wholeness to it. And that is a real freedom, to dwell fully within what is given, what's real, but to manifest the beauty of something that's new, that's fresh, that's particular. And so similarly, for each one of your lives tonight, you and I, each one of us, we're called into this relationship with God. Into this relationship with, in the Christian tradition, we say that goodness, beauty, and truth, this is who God is, right? This is who he is, and it's revealed in the person of Jesus. And so we're called into relationship with him and his character, and he invites us to participate in him. Not by escaping these things, but actually beginning to inhabit reality more fully, more profoundly. So that's the end of my paper. And hopefully you followed some of that, or you found it interesting. Yeah, go.
Can you write Schindler's name, like, what's
Yeah,
his
yeah.
first name?
How did you find Schindler?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Yeah, do you remember?
Yeah, there's a philosopher on YouTube who's quite famous, and his name is John Vervaeke, and he's a Platonist, so he's like a classical, like a Stoic or something like that, like modern day. I don't think you find many of them anymore. And he said in one of his lectures that he thinks D.C. Schindler is the best living theologian, which, you know, that's a big statement for a guy who's not a Christian and all that, but it piqued my interest.
Yeah,
And I realized, oh, this, and then I started reading some other theologians who love him. Anyways, it got me curious.
G.C. Schindler with a C.
You're writing it down?
Schindler
Yeah,
with
sorry.
a S.C.
You're writing it down.
Like Schindler's List.
Yes, but with a, was that with a C?
I don't
Just
think
H?
there was.
Yes.
Yeah.
Shouldn't there S?
DC, oh yeah, DC,
He's he's at Catholic University of America. He is, yeah, I don't know him personally, obviously. I'd like to write him because I've spent so much time reading his stuff. So I need to say thank you.
yeah. I love that, there's so many things to love, but this idea of what reality really is so powerful.
Encouraging and powerful and
Yeah.
loving,
Yeah.
right? Would you say, when you use the phrase, transformation of one's soul,
Yeah.
would Paul, Tarsus,
Mm.
refer to that as sanctification?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. And so, different people in the Christian tradition will talk about parts of the soul differently. So it's not really something very precise. It strikes me that the most dominant way that people talk about it, like St. John of the Cross, or someone would say your memory. You could say intellect or your reason, and your desires or your will. And so all of these things, we know this, can be, it's a strong word, but kind of corrupted, let's say. And so in relationship to Jesus, with his real presence and his word, is the way that God's Spirit is active in the world and actually can heal us in our memories. And, you know, I like this, you may not like this, but I like this, is that actually God uses your imagination.
Yeah.
You know, as you recall some of those memories, he actually can heal your memories, right? And I think that's some of what's happening at some level in counseling, at its best, right? And your reason, it can be more aligned with what is good and true, revealed in the scriptures. Go ahead.
It's classically what they do in what's called CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yeah.
And it's trying to get you to think about various incidents that have happened in your life, and to remember, okay, these things, I mean, what happens with a person with PTSD or GAD is these past experiences become real to you again.
Yeah.
And so you go back
Yeah.
to that period of time.
Yes.
And you are living that now. Yeah. And so what you're trying to do with cognitive behavioral therapy is trying to get this person to say, okay, yes, this did happen to you.
Right.
Don't push it away, but accept that this is what was, and to go forward from that. And it's very hard. I know I had to do this for a good long time.
Yeah. And people might disagree with this, that's okay, you're welcome to push back. But I think, just speaking to that, like Peter by the fire, he denies Jesus 3 times.
Yes.
Jesus brings him back to the fire.
Yeah.
Makes him breakfast. Do you love me, Peter?
Yeah.
Do you love me, Peter? Yeah. Do you love me? That's grace, healing your mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a really important part of that whole therapy, is to try to give yourself some forgiveness as